We're pacing a possum. What up, little man? Welcome. We're out here on LA County's second worst bike trail, the Shabarm Skyline Trail. And it's time to give a tour of my bikes, as been demanded by the viewers. This is going to be for like bike nerds only. Sorry, transit people. And we're starting with this one. It's the one that's been seen in most of my videos, and there's a reason for that. But first, it must be noted that I recently downsized my fleet. I got rid of my main bike that I'd been using for the longest time. It was my mom's old bike, and there are reasons why I got rid of it, which will be covered in a couple future videos. So stay tuned for that. This is the bike that's had the second longest, and incidentally, it's the exact same color. A lot of people mistook it for the other one because they both have front baskets, they both have this color, and they both have rear racks, and they're both super tall. But there's a few major differences between this one. Notably, it's a step-through frame, and the wheels are 26 inches, which leads me to the first difference of why I got rid of the other one. The reason I was using this one in most of my videos, especially the transit ones, is because 26-inch wheels fit in the slots on the bus bike racks easier, and the other bike had me increasingly paranoid with the new crappy bike racks made by Bic Rack that it was going to fall out because, one, it's more tall and more top-heavy, and two, the wheels didn't fit in the slots as good. Where on a 26 wheel, the hook would grip higher, and on a 700, it would grip lower, ironically, even though it's a bigger wheel. It's annoying. And that was one of the contributing factors of why I got rid of that bike, aside from it being super heavy. And also because I had a third bike that wasn't getting loved enough, and that's now the main bike, which you'll see after this one. So I bought this one in 2015 for $10 at a rummage sale. I nicknamed it the San Antonio Smuggler because I bought it at a church rummage sale named San Antonio, and because I built this box for it for helping me find stuff in the street, and because St. Anthony's who you pray to help you find stuff, so that's why I picked such a stupid name for it. The Sass. It's not like a name that I say out loud to people and like refer to it. It's more like a personal nickname. And you'll see the other bike has one as well. This bike has seen the most abuse of my bikes, of course. It's the bike that I got my only car crash in. Someone pulled in front of me when they weren't supposed to, and I hit the side of their door and destroyed their mirror, and my front wheel and the front basket at the time took all the damage. I later crashed this thing into a curb, and miraculously the wheel and the fork didn't get damaged, but the frame buckled right here. You can see right here it's like bulged out, and here it was bulged out, but like 2 years later it started cracking, so I re-welded it. It was kind of astonishing that it took that long to start cracking, and when I crashed it, the steering geometry kind of changed because the whole frame went like that. And I was just like, you know what, I'll just keep riding it and see what happens, and apparently nothing bad happened. The only major difference is when turning, my foot can hit the tire more easily. Did I mention it's springtime? Oh my gosh, that's so cute. So my foot hitting the wheel when I'm turning sometimes is not a big deal. It just feels different when steering, and honestly I got used to it. This is a Huffy rock trail from the 1990's, I believe, and it's from an era of cheap American bikes where, with intense foreign competition, they were going some really serious, drastic measures to save money on frames and bikes, and this bike definitely shows it. Made in USA doesn't automatically mean better, for those who don't know. Oh, they're coming back? Well, they are coming back.
Red 6 standing by.
And for a city named Industry, it does host some nature. Where were we? Okay, bikes with cheap features because they're American. Look at the fork ends. It's just the fork squished at the end with the slot notched into it. That's a cheap feature. It means the fork had to be really thick to make it do that. And normally you would have a dropout separately brazed or welded on at the end. But I have not any problems with that. They used to have those annoying tab things around the axles to prevent you from being stupid and falling them out when you don't tighten it, but I took them out because they're annoying. Let me take this bag off. Here's my homemade mechanism for attaching these. This is an old laptop case. I just put carabiners on it where the old strap went. And I mounted some eyelets on this rack. And back here, I shoved a piece of 3/8 tubing in there because I got some new panniers that hook onto a 3/8 tube. And prior to this, I didn't have any way to hook them on. But look at this dropout. This is so cheap. It's like really thin. It's just the stamping. It's not even forged or anything good. And it's just shoved into the end of the stays and like spot welded. It's so cheap. But miraculously, nothing bad has happened. The other annoying part with this was the mounting screw holes. They didn't even come tapped. They came with like the tap drill size, but I had to tap them myself. I know these kind of bikes are designed for like department stores where people aren't even going to ride them more than 60 miles in their lifetime, and believe me, this bike has lasted way longer than it was supposed to. Way longer. Like, there's so much stuff to talk about that this might have to be a 2-part series. Pretty much the running gag with this bike is anywhere it's pink, that means I had to weld it because that was the only color of spray paint I had. It's kind of a flex to see, hey y'all, I can weld, look at me. The first thing that was welded on here was brake bosses. The original brakes on this thing were so annoying. They were like those side pull ones that mount with one screw. They weren't even that good, like the clamping pressure. And annoyingly, you had to deflate the tire to take the wheel off, which was super annoying. So I was like, no, I'm not dealing with this anymore, and machined my own brake bosses and welded them on. Here you can see where I accidentally welded them on the wrong location and had to cut them off and re-weld them down here because the pad wasn't lining up. That was annoying to have to line them up. I didn't have like a good fixture to like position them. The front ones I seem to manage all right. One of them is like kind of tilted just so you can barely reach it, but it worked. And I just used the flux core welder. You didn't need to like TIG weld it because this tubing is kind of thick. Which brings me to the next point. How is this frame made? It appears that the main triangle was brazed together. This is brazed, this is brazed, but the back triangle was like MIG welded. It seemed really odd. Oh, that was just spot welded or something, or just stamped over it. And this became annoying. The original bottom bracket was a one-piece crank, which at first I thought was cool because it's one piece and like, oh, it's so simple. But it turns out those big fat bearing cups were not suited for the type of riding I do where you actually pedal hard, and they kept cracking. So I bought this conversion kit to put a European style bottom bracket in there, and it was like, oh great. But then I pulled everything out and like these pieces of tubing extend into the bottom bracket shell just a little bit. So when shoving these cups in, they were in the way, so I had to grind them down. It was super annoying. A feature of this bike being really cheap is that the bottom bracket shell, instead of being like a round tubing, it was a stamping, and then they bent it, and they had holes in here stamped so they could stick this chain stays in there. I mean, if you think about it in a manufacturing sense, that's really ingenious and it's a cost-saving mechanism, but when doing a European bottom bracket conversion, that's really annoying. So I put a better crank on it. It's so much better now. I feel like I'm getting way more power. The original one-piece crank was like really short. This is a BioPace crank. I took it off the other bike that you're going to see in this video because I turned that single speed and I didn't think you could have elliptical chain rings on a single speed. But I love it on this one because it gets so much power efficiency and whatever. All right, what next? The kickstand fell off. I had to re-weld that back on. And recently, the seat tube separated from the bottom bracket shell and I had to re-weld that. That's one of the disadvantages of it being a step-through frame is, yes, it's super convenient when getting on and off, but it's a weaker frame and all that force going like this and like this eventually just cracked it right there. I was really surprised. It was actually kind of funny when I was riding it because the whole rest of the frame was together, but that part was missing. So like the frame was just extra wobbly. And up until that point, I was wondering why my crank seemed like it was running out this way. Like, why is the chain rubbing the derailleur so much? And I was like, oh, the entire bottom bracket is just going like this. It wasn't like my crank being loose. So in the category of bearings being loose, this is the headset nut thingy. I don't like how it's a knurled thing on one side and a nut. It's like, how do you hold this and tighten it with the wrench at the same time? I had to stick some really skinny vice grips on this to service it. And actually when I welded it down here, I took the whole headset out because welding that close to the bearings wasn't going to be a good idea. So I learned from the mistakes of that scooter upgrade I did years ago. While we're here, this is the cable yoke that I made for the cantilever brakes on the front. I couldn't find one that would give me enough reach, so I actually just made this out of some sheet metal, a carriage bolt with a hole in it, and just some screws and washers. And it actually works pretty good. It's kind of heavy, but it looks really awesome and gets the job done. The reason I have cantilever brakes on the front and a V-brake on the back is partially because I didn't know what V-brakes were, And I didn't realize the advantage of them was you don't need a separate cable stop. It has it built in. But also because I thought if I put a V-brake here, it would interfere with the rack mounting mechanism. So that's why I chose this. I had to put a cable stop, and that ended up being just a block of aluminum sandwiched between these two rack supports. While we're here, the rack mount, this is a block of aluminum with a groove milled in it diagonally to get that angle. This is probably way heavier than it needs to be. I like the mechanism on my other bike that I figured out, but it's just some steel plate. Probably going to break the basket eventually, which is why I like the other one. It grips on the rim. This is actually the third basket this bike has had. I made these out of some shelving units that my old roommate left behind, and I just welded the corners together. They've been working pretty good. The support for the rack is just some aluminum angle pieces. This is like a rectangular block with tapped holes in the ends and then just a hole through the middle. This is just a square piece of aluminum tapped in both ends. I think this is pretty ingenious. Because before I had vertical stays, and that interfered with the bus bike rack where you could only grip up to here. Or later I realized I could like put the hook way over here if I was smart enough. But actually the Sportworks Apex ones were like really tight fit, so I was like, you know what? No, I'm just gonna do this. And really, as long as I'm not carrying like too much weight, that shouldn't be a problem. I've carried the Dutch oven in this. I've carried like heavy stuff. It works. What can we say about the stem? People often think this is a fork just shoved upside down. It's actually just so happened the pieces of scrap metal I used were already bent like that. Kind of reminds me of a saguaro cactus. And the original stem is right here. I just welded more pieces to it. I was kind of amazed that the entire stem is made out of one stamped piece of sheet metal. So in the theme of cheap American bikes, that is kind of astounding. This actually broke once when I crashed it. I had to re-weld it and welded a gusset right here. That's what they're called, gussets. This right here is a speaker holder. I jokingly say it's a burrito mount. And now for the handlebars. Firstly, this is like one of my trademark thingies of using crutches grips for the handlebar grips because they fit over the 7/8 tubing exactly the same. And then the end cap is to prevent you from accidentally like scratching stuff when you lean it against stuff, or like if you accidentally get too close to a car, it won't scratch it. This is a cheap little bell that my friend gave me. I think both shifters were replaced. This might be the original one. Yeah, I think it was, because the original right one broke off right here. They're friction shifters. That's what I like using because indexing is too confusing and messes up too much. Because one's a cantilever brake and one's a V-brake, there's two different style brake levers. That's for the V-brake. That's for the cantilever. This is actually the original brake lever from this bike. Another cheap feature about this thing is the handlebar is just a straight piece of 7/8 tubing, and they put a shim to fit it in the stem, which is a 1-inch diameter. Or normally the handlebar tube increases in diameter and then decreases. So yeah, that's cheap. It hasn't given me any problems yet, surprisingly. The reason for all this tape is because I used to wrap my cassette player around the bike handlebars with the lock, and I didn't want it scratching. This light mount is my device I've used because the original light mount for my light broke, so I just hose clamped a piece of aluminum that's that size, and I just used set screw wing nut thingies to fit them in. And also my camera holder. I guess it's pretty exhaustive for the front end. Got some reflectors here. Other cheap thing about this bike is it doesn't have cable stops on the frame, so it's just entire full-length housing, which is kind of annoying because it's heavier and you have to get a full-length piece of housing if you need to change the length. Or if you try something like this where you just hook two pieces of housing together. It's been working for the shifter. For the brakes, I did that for years, but the interface between the two cables was causing the cable, like the physical cable, to wear out. So I just went full piece of housing recently with this one. Came with these clamps. This one I had to tape on because I think the original one broke. I love that the seat post is held in with a carriage bolt. I think that's really ingenious. And it also served as the mounting point for my rack, which is made out of an old sleeve ironing board. People are always really impressed with this because it looks so like retro and really wild and awesome. And it's just a cargo box. I've had bus drivers think it's a gas tank because it's kind of shaped like the ones on a motorcycle. But no, there's no gasoline. Let me on the bus, please. It's just a toolbox. Annoying part of this is there's like a vertical thing right here that kind of hard to reach behind to grab stuff. But other than that, pretty cool. I'm actually really amazed that I managed to put this together and the latch lined up and it still doesn't come undone. but just to be safe, I keep a bungee cord around it. The rack is, of course, held on with more aluminum angle pieces. I bolted some U-shaped eyelets, if that's what they're called. And recently I added some crutches tubes to prevent my bags from hitting the wheel. Kind of work alright. This metal is not really good for much. It's so thin. But for this application, it seemed to suffice. And there's a trailer hitch for the Bikes at Work trailer. And the seat post. This had to be made ridiculously heavy because the frame being so small, I had to extend it really far, and my first attempt just bent because I just welded the old one to the new one. This is like a segment of the old seat post, a piece of tubing. There's a solid bar of steel in between them, and then I wrapped a piece of pipe around both of them with solid rivets through all 4 pieces. And then up here, it's just a 7/8 bar shoved in here with a solid rivet through it. I had to turn it down to fit in here. It's unnecessarily heavy, but necessarily heavy for it to function. And the saddle is nothing special. I recently got that. And the rear light is actually just a headlamp, just upside down, and conveniently fits between the rails of the seat. I don't know if that was intentional, but it just so happened. It's perfect. These are the original derailleurs that came with this bike. Originally it was a 2x, and now there's 3, and actually this probably isn't the right derailleur for this because on the small gear, sometimes it rubs right there because there isn't enough like capacity or something. Rear derailleur hasn't given me much problems. The freewheel I put on here has been giving me problems. It's been clacking like crazy for some reason sometimes, but I've been told that's a defect of the freewheel. It's not like I have anything adjusted wrong. I hose clamped the housing right here because it was hitting the wheel or the chain rings, and then some reflectors for bling. Both of these wheels currently have one spoke that's broken, so I need to fix that. There's the other one. You can ride a bike with missing spokes as long as you have enough holding the rest of it together. And I do have some detailed articles on my blog, Greens and Machines, of how I upgraded this thing originally. Like this, I had to machine like the bottom half of the stem to fit in there to match the original one. And then, of course, machining all this stuff to make the seat post work, which probably could have been done easier, but I just wanted it to be really strong. Oh, we should do a tally. What on this bike is actually original to this bike? So the frame, the right brake lever, the left shifter, the derailleurs, and that's it. I think this is going to have to be 2 parts, so we'll end this part right now. There's the San Antonio Smuggler, 1990's Huffy rock trail, and stay tuned for part 2. This trail is so bad that they keep forgetting to open this gate at the end of a stretch that's 1.5 miles long or something. But it looks like someone did some ethical vandalism and peeled back the fencing so you can walk through it. Not the best ideal situation, but hey, it works.